We're going to be talking about people analytics. And so, of course, we had to go call some of the greatest people in the world who understand the power of analytics and how do you deploy that. So first, without further ado, we're going to go to the queen of the panel. Let's go all the way to Milwaukee. Wendy, come to the stage and tell them who you are.
Okay, thanks, Donald. You can introduce me any day. I like that. So, hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Hirsch. I'm with Eaton, and I am the Vice President of HR Technology, Analytics, and Services, and super excited to be here.
Wendy, thank you for being here. And yes, I look forward to introing you in the future at a few more conferences. We're going to take this show to Cleveland. We started in London with Chris. We've gone to Milwaukee. Let's go to Cleveland. Ernest, tell us a little bit about yourself, sir.
Hey, Donald, and to you and Chris, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. My name is Ernest Marshall. I'm the CHRO at Eaton Corporation. We're a diversified intelligent power management company, and we probably touch just about anything you can imagine in your life. And so really thrilled to be here and talk about an important topic for all of us. So thanks a lot for having me and look forward to this dialogue.
Yes, I'm confident we're going to have some great conversation, Ernest. So thank you for joining us as well. Of course, Milwaukee is wellly known for like so many things. Most recently, the Milwaukee Bucks winning a championship in the NBA. So we had to go back to Milwaukee, grab another great talented leader. So Dave, come to the stage and tell them a little bit about yourself, sir.
Hey, Donald. Yeah, thanks everyone for just tuning in and welcoming here. I'm Dave Sachs, Senior Director of People Analytics and Data Science here at Northwestern Mutual. We focus on improving our customers' lives through financial security, and really excited to talk about people analytics today.
Awesome, Dave. Thanks for being here. And then last but certainly not least, my friend Dallas Dave. Always good to see you, my friend. Please tell them a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so happy to round us out here. Brad Williams. I'm with Northwestern Mutual as well. I head up our HR technology and people analytics team here.
Awesome. Brad, thank you for being here, man. All right, so people analytics. Let's try to frame the conversation a little bit. People analytics, it's widely talked about right now across so many different teams, cross industry, and like really HR leaders are really leveraging this data a little bit differently and how they try to drive business outcomes. I guess the first thing I want to do, and we'll get everybody to speak on this one, is like, how are you defining people analytics? And like, what does it mean for your organization? And we'll go in that same order. So we'll start with you, Wendy.
Sure, great. So it's interesting because I've been in this space, dare I say, over 2 decades. I started when I was like 10. You know, the definition is always changing, right? It could be anywhere from kind of basic reporting, counts, rates, trends, to advanced analytics, predictive analytics. And so my point of view, there isn't any single one definition other than the underpinning that it is about telling an effective story or having a key insight as it relates to a piece of information about people.
Wendy, I appreciate that. You kind of spoke on this evolution of people analytics and how it may have started in one place, but moved somewhere else. So I really appreciate that, especially around the storytelling. Dave, I know you wanted to weigh in on this. Like, how are you defining people analytics? Like, what does it mean for you and your organization?
Yeah, and I thought about this and I recall my conversation when first time I actually learned about people analytics, and it was with Wendy. And what really struck me was the idea of being able to think about people as assets to be grown, not costs to be minimized. And that really hit home for me, kind of that initial pull towards people analytics. And now the way I think about it, it's being able to bring the voice, all of our employees to the C-suite, to the leaders through data and through the accurate representation of that data. And so that we can manage the talent risks that come along with it and ultimately be able to drive the outcomes of the business. And I think for us, how we're applying it here at NM is through our people vision, and something we've been talking about is our employee journey and how we're able to measure the way we connect with our employees, the way we show up for our employees here at NM through that employee journey, and being able to measure those different things so we know what are the right investments, how can we manage those various talent risks. So when I think about people analytics and what we're bringing, that's what comes to mind.
That's a quotable, that they're assets to be grown. That is a quotable. I want to do a double click on that if you don't mind. Sure. Ernest, like, Do you believe all CHROs subscribe to what Dave just said?
I hope so. I certainly do. And if they don't, you might want to find another place to be. But I love what both Dave and Wendy said, and would just say this. There's always been a lot of analysis being done. That's not new. People have done analytics. What I think has been a game changer in this particular area is the insights that you derive from those analytics. And that's a really, really important transformation, because I think I have a phrase that I use, we've always shown the data, right? And I think the next phase of the insights leads to outcomes where you expose the data. I think that's really the next evolution that we've really got to get to, because there's so much data. Every time we do anything in the world these days, there's a transaction that happens that yields a lot of data. And you hear things like big data and all those things. I always thought big data was you change the font size, because data is data. And I think what's valuable, and where I think this is changing from just people analytics, is really analytics and insights in a much broader scale. Because I can tell you, for us, it's not about just people and HR analytics. This is about business outcomes that are really important to move the organization forward. And I think that's adding real value from the HR organization, at least here at Eaton.
Yeah, I like the way you expanded that, because most companies will subscribe to this idea that people are the greatest asset of their organization. And then when we talk about people analytics, they still find a way to pigeonhole the conversation with only HR leaders. So I really like what you said there, Ernest. It's definitely impact across the business. Brad, so I have to pivot to you. When I think about what Ernest just said around the impact across the organization, like, what tools are you using to help drive that impact? And you kind of heard this theme that came from Wendy and from Dave around telling this story. How are you driving a successful story with the tools that you're using?
Yeah, I really think it does come down to storytelling. There's a lot of great technology and platforms and tools that are out there that can help unlock some of the insights and help tell that story. But at the core of it, to me, it is about that storytelling. And further, I think one of the things about people analytics, as I define it, is it's less about, identifying, here's the solution, here's how you solve this problem that organizations have. To me, it's more about sparking a conversation and uncovering something that data unleashes, and having the right conversations with the right people to engage together and talk about and uncover what that right solution is in a data-backed way. And so I think there's plenty of tools, there's plenty of different technology out there that can help do that. But to me, the most important things underneath that are really the storytelling, the curiosity, the proactiveness that underpins all of the data there.
I'm going to challenge us a little bit. I like that, Brad. I'm going to challenge us though, right? Because so often HR leaders, I underscore what Ernest said around, like, so many times HR leaders will come to a meeting with data and have data for data's sake, right? And there is no great storytelling, because they have not done the work to try to figure out the insights and the actions that they want to be able to provide to the business, as almost as if recommendations on how we improve. So Wendy and Ernest, I got to come to you two. I want to know, how are you all extracting insights from the data to be able to drive those meaningful outcomes? And how have you seen the business effectively respond to the successful storytelling that you all are hoping to correlate?
Sure, I'm happy to start, and then Ernest, feel free to chime in. A couple of things. And actually, it's interesting. Ernest and I just got off a call with his HR leadership team, and we just did a mini crash course on data visualization, right? So this exact topic around how do you drive the right conversation? And what was really interesting, at one point, we talked about what are the specific verbs of the action that you want coming out of that conversation, and pick from a list of verbs, right? What is it that you want somebody to do versus sharing data just for data's sake, right? We all want to show all the great work we've done and how smart we are, but the reality is we have to get to the core message that drives whatever action or change you want. And I think that's part of the big shift. And I also think sometimes, I mean, as I said, been in this space a long time, and you always want these big reveals, the big ahas, and you're not always going to have a big aha. Sometimes a confirmation is okay too, for people to settle back and say, huh, all right, that feels good to me. That feels about right. And so I think we have to challenge ourselves not to feel like we always have to have a huge reveal, but to make sure that we're providing the right story so that whatever change may or may not need to happen, we're pushing people towards that change.
I really like that, especially that you're validating some of the reasons you continue to do some of the things you do by testing that in the data. So I think that's really good. Ernest, hop in here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree with Wendy. Donna, one of the things I think is important for all of us is, data analytics, whatever you want to call it, doesn't replace just good old-fashioned thinking. And part of a great analysis starts with what is it you're really trying to solve? What are you trying to discover? And I think having that fundamental conversation up front before you start throwing data at it, because look, you can do analysis for days and still sit there, look at it, and we've done this with the board, because it's very important for me when I look at data, I want to also understand what the data is not telling me. And that's a really important facet of, this what I call exploration. Because what I want the board to know is I want them to be able to look at the data. It's very clear, it's very simple, and they know the next questions to ask, because I need them to ask the questions of the leadership team to help drive the agenda forward. And so it's really important to kind of think about, have that discussion up front. And again, I go back to these insights and outcomes, because what I see a lot is a lot of data, a lot of processes that come as a result of the analysis, and a lot of activities. Well, processes, activities, and data don't equal outcomes. So how do we kind of understand up front what we're trying to solve for, really understand what the data might not be telling us, and then formulate the right set of visual data points for the leadership team of the board so they can ask insightful questions that drive outcomes back through the business.
So can I ask a question of Ernest? Ernest, I'll put you on the hot seat. So, I mean, because you sit right in every ops review. And, I think one of the things I've heard over the years is, right, an ops review, and HR goes to present, they're like, all right, they have their slide. They present their slide, right? Versus engaging in the conversation when we're talking about the state of the business to raise questions around, well, what does that mean for people? And what's the labor impact? I don't know, can you talk a little bit about like HR's role in those ops reviews and how kind of data comes into play?
Yeah, and this might be a little controversial, Donna, but and thanks for the question, Wendy. I would say if we were investors and we listen to calls, people talk about organic growth, inorganic growth, working capital, supply chain issues, all of that, right? So one might say, it's controversial, the strategies don't differentiate, okay? People do, right? And so your valuation is based quite a bit on those intangibles that are really, really important for an organization. And so I think adding value back to those intangibles and how we really demonstrate to the organization how having great succession health and depth, having the right I&D strategies and the data that forces you to kind of ask the right questions and pulls the right actions behind it. How do you understand kind of how the networks in the organization, who are the people that are getting called on a lot, and where is that causing bureaucracy in the system? I mean, these are the kind of things that we're trying to drive, because at the end of the day, if an investor believes in the strategy, that's one gate. Okay, they say, yes, I believe. But what they're betting on are the people in the company that are going to really achieve that strategy. And that's where I tell HR folks all the time, with the right analytics and insights, you have a powerful role in determining how successful the business is. You've got to you have to think about it differently, because it's powerful if you do it the right way. And I think that I give Wendy and the team a lot of credit, because I think when you have a board member tell you, Donna, that this is the best display of diversity data I've ever seen. That's when you know you've kind of really put down insightful analytics that can be acted on.
Yeah, and I'll layer on top of that, and I'm curious, I guess, what the other panelists think here. I think this is one of the biggest challenges with people analytics is staying ahead of the board, senior leadership, and the questions that they're going to have, the focus, and being able to think, one or two steps ahead of them so that when they are ready to ask those questions, you've got the data, you've got maybe not a solidified answer, but you've got at least enough information to arm an intelligent conversation versus being reactive and caught on your heels a little bit. And it's one of the things I know at NM that we've made a lot of progress, but I think it's a challenge here and one of the maturity curves that we're on. But I think it's really a challenge across the entire people analytics function is really being in tune enough with your stakeholders, your leadership, to be one or two steps ahead of their thought process, the questions that are going to come up. And I think, Ernest, you kind of illustrated that there.
Brad, I totally agree with you. I think the future of people analytics, and we're seeing this now, right, in certain pockets in certain organizations, is predict and prescribe. We need to be able to predict what is going to be useful to business leaders so they can drive better outcomes. And then we need to be able to be in a position to prescribe to them why that is or is not the right medicine for the organization. And to your point, I couldn't agree with you more. +1 ditto _ retweet. Like, we absolutely in our function we have to skate in front of the business. I think this idea of us being reactive will continue to have certain parts of our industry or even certain folks in our profession falling slowly behind of this momentum that we're carrying by being able to extract insights from data. So I totally agree with you there. I got to ask, so since it seems like I saw a lot of head nodding, I got to go to you, Dave, because I'm curious, where do you see this in 5 years, right? Like, when you think about people analytics, the people team, HR teams, and the impact we can have on the business, where do you see us going in the next 5 years? And Ernest, I'd love to hear your take simply based on your interactions with the board as well.
Yeah, I really think that those connections to the business outcomes and how we connect to that, right, from a people analytics perspective, from a talent perspective, being able to drive insights through those mechanisms. And I think going back to the last question, really the contextual pieces, right? The understanding that we have as people analytics professionals, how we bring information to those conversations, it really starts with context. And that's the first thing I try to understand with our partners is why are they asking those questions, and helping them understand what's available and why it's important to them. And when they can explain and react to that and give me feedback, I start to learn. I start to tailor what I need to provide, what I need to produce, how I support them, so that they can have more meaningful interactions with their leaders. So I think, being able to drive stories through better understanding, better context, having that, I'll say, white space. And so being able to do things proactively, I think, means being able to do things sustainably. So looking for those opportunities so that we can create that white space, have those dialogues, have better understanding. I think those are big pieces to what we need to continue to drive in people analytics overall. I also think, just as we're coming out of the pandemic, probably, right, hybrid work, remote work, how we really look at the connectedness, driving that, especially with a remote population that might not interact with another employee live, not regularly at least. So how do we continue to build that trust, build that stickiness to the team that they're on, the organization that they're on? I think that's going to be an important part of people analytics in the near future.
I agree with Dave for sure. And I just use some of the words that I heard because I love being on these panels and learning from all of you. So Donna, you said predict and prescribe, which I like. Bill, you said, stay 1 to 2 steps ahead. And Dave just talked about context. And I think to your question specifically around the board, we have a responsibility to make the board better. And it's not that we have a fantastic board here at Eaton. I mean, I'm a really great group of folks, but I think we make them better by informing them in a way that they are even more connected to the organization. They understand critical aspects of what we're trying to drive, and they become partners in that process where now they're coming back. What I love is I love the 1 or 2 steps ahead. And I think if you lay out the right data in front of them and the right insights, they challenge you back and make you better and send you back into the organization for more exploration. And then in that process of exploration, you've got to get smarter, where then you can come back to the board and be clear and be able to explain it with clarity. And I think that continuum process, when it works, is a differentiator for the company, because now you've got a push and a pull from the board, because they now understand with more clarity exactly what you're trying to drive for the company to be world class. And I think the second part of that, just quickly, is, what I'm really interested in now, and I think I'm getting hints of this as well, is it's always easy to do the quantitative part of the analysis. There's a qualitative feature as well. It's really important. And, Wendy's helping me learn, how do we really take the qualitative aspects of data and really formulate that into a strategy as well? Because
the art and science, right?
The art and science. Absolutely, the art and science. And I just think that's really something that's hit me hard, that it is an art and a science, and we've got to ensure that we are working collaboratively with our leadership teams and our board to make us all better.
So Wendy, if I can maybe learn from you live on the spot here, I'd love to hear some tips and tricks, or what you're doing to capture that qualitative component, because like Ernest said, I think it's absolutely vital to the success of people analytics and fully maximizing the value that we can offer the organization.
Yeah, so it's a couple of things. It's interesting, right? So for those who are listening in and you're on a people analytics team, you're a data scientist, right? We believe in the science and we believe in the data, but there's such a judgment aspect to what we do that we can't forget, right? I mean, Dave talked about context. Is, we've all been in those situations. Just looking at the output of a logistic regression is not going to tell you what action the board or, business leader needs to take. So, one of the muscles that, in our analytics team that we continue to try to exercise is that judgment part. What is our interpretation? And sometimes our interpretation is off. So a lot of times, like if we get pretty tactical on a slide, I might not put a statement. I might put a question. And the question is, this is what I think, but raising it as a question to get other people's perspective. And I think you always have to have that kind of judgment part. If it's okay, I want to go back to a further comment about this notion of proactive versus reactive, because I get a little bit worried, right? Again, for people analytics professionals on this call, I could interpret that as, I got to go be proactive. I got to go do this work, but be careful for doing analytic work just for the sake of doing it, right? You don't want to just be doing research. There has to be kind of a business rationale for what you're doing. So this notion of the push and pull gets to be a pretty delicate balance sometimes, because you can easily lose your audience by pushing things from the center that the business is saying, what, right? Where's this coming from? I didn't ask for it. I don't need it. So finding that balance, I think, is really important. So I just want to make sure to make that point.
Just add one thing to that, just quickly, is, I think, and I told Wendy this when she started, success of her organization is when the business is asking her to do the work, not when you're pushing it back to them. And I can tell you unequivocally now, the businesses are pulling at her quite a bit now to do work. And then the last point on yours, Brad, and I wasn't a big believer, I'll just say it up front. We did this organizational network analysis, which Wendy, she's laughing because I was like, I don't get it. But I got to tell you, one of our businesses, talking about the qualitative, a good portion of that work was really having conversations with people, and then being able to then take that dialogue and use it in an analytical way. So I just wanted to hone it, because I think your question was a good one. I just want to bring that point out.
Yeah, leaders literally standing in front of the board, looking at the networks, having conversations, pointing out names and connections. That's the the art part of it.
Yeah, and I think, Wendy, even going back to the proactiveness there, I absolutely agree. That can be a dangerous path to go down and end up being a waste of energy, resources, effort, all of those things. One of the, Dave, if he's on screen, may roll his eyes here. One of my favorite quotes of all time is Henry Ford. If I would have asked the customer what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. I think part of that is, the hidden component to me in that quote is really being in tune with your customer or partners or stakeholders, whatever you want to call them, enough to know that a car is the right solution for them, and being in tune versus going off and building something that really they just want a faster horse. That's all they want. That's their expectation. That's what they need. And you go off and spin up a wonderful, great car and shove it down their throat and think it's the greatest thing in the world. But it's not what they need. It's not what they want. It's not what's going to add value to them. And so I think that's the fine tuning of proactiveness there, is really understanding at an intimate level what your partners and stakeholders truly need. Even if they can't articulate it, you've got enough of an understanding, enough contextualization to really be proactive and be effective at being proactive.
And I did mentally roll my eyes a little bit there, Brad, but I think that's where, some of the natural interactions that you might have with other people in your HR department, other embedded HR partners, those that know the business, have a heartbeat, you could get a sense of what's top of mind right now, what are their leaders talking about. And I think through the different tools or different services that you provide to other partners in HR, you're able to really gather that, right? So using that, those sessions, those times together as a way to better understand the business, always being able to grab that context, I think little by little adds up to what you're describing, and knowing what they want, or at least knowing the essence of what they want, so that you can give them something that they don't even know they can use yet.
I agree with all of that, by the way. I think the bridge is we co-create together, and then we don't. I actually love that quote, Brad. So we co-create together. So it's not like I'm formulating something and I pass it to Wendy. You get away from that when Wendy's with me and we're co-creating together. And so I'm getting the collective intellect of both of us, or her team or my team, together. And so we're co-creating this together. And I think you're always going to get to the best solution when the collective intellect of the group is a part of the definition.
I'm so glad you said that, Ernest. I want to stay there for a little bit, because this idea around being proactive, typically in our profession, is people being transactional, not relational, right? And so what ends up happening is you don't have proximity to the business need. And therefore, if you're going to do proactive work, it's often not useful. And so for folks on the phone, I want to make sure that you walk away with the right understanding. You see the head nods from our panelists today is because we're essentially stacking hands saying, you got to have a relationship with the business. In order for you to understand where you should be evaluating and deriving analytics and insights from said data, it has to be relational. It cannot be transactional. You have to be able to build proximity to the business in order for your proactive efforts to be useful. And so I just want to make sure that we may all like or may dislike Henry Ford's quotes, but at the end of the day, you have to have that level of connectedness to the business if you're going to go derive and drive value for them. So I really appreciate that. I guess one of the other things
we always call it executive sponsorship, right? That's what we always say, right? When we go to do work, you have to have business executive sponsorship for the work to co-create. You made me think as you talked about that, Ernest. Dave, I don't know if you'll remember this, but many years ago, Dave and I were doing some predictive analytic work at a past life. And we always talked about it as a demonstration project, right? We wanted to demonstrate so that leaders could understand what is advanced analytics. And at one point, one of the business leaders was like, stop calling it a demonstration project. It's not a demonstration anymore. You're actually doing the work. And it was like such an epiphany, right? Just the words I was using were off. And it was an example that this business leader was saying, look, we created this. It's no longer a demonstration.
I got to ask, I really want all four of you to chime in on this. where do they start? You got HR generalists on the call. You have people who may be mid-career or maybe even at the beginning of their career starting in people analytics. You might even have some folks that, started when they were 11 and they're like, look, the landscape has changed. How do I get and put my team in a position to be able to deliver that kind of value? So I'm going to start with you, Wendy, and work my way around. Where would you tell them to start?
That's a good question. I think you have to just start with the basics, right? Counts, rates, tabulations, right? Just get a good understanding of the nature of your workforce. If there's a book out there, and people will laugh because they know I'm going to say this, it's called Play to Your Strengths. It's from, a while ago, but there is a notion of what's called an internal labor market map. It was developed by Mercer. Great, useful tool. And it is literally just counts, rates, tabulations. It's a great way to start to have a conversation and start to share some insights. And, one of the things I always talk about is this notion of, you see these maturity curves, like an analytics maturity curve. I hate that. There is no maturity curve. You should be living at all ends of that spectrum. So if you're just starting, don't think that you have to live at the top end of predictive analytics. You have to be doing reporting. You do reporting, you see an insight, you do an advanced project to understand it better. When you're done with that project, you come out with 3 metrics that you then have to report on. So realize that you have to live all along that continuum all the time. I think it's a misnomer when people come into this space and think, oh, I only am going to do the advanced stuff, because that's not really true. That's not the only place you add value.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to fully immerse yourself. And I do think that, and I had this conversation with Wendy, it's almost like college, right? I want some people to be at the 100 elective area. I want some at the 200. I want some at the 300. And I think that no one should be at 0. I mean, you have to have some knowledge around what it means to do analytics and derive insights and those kinds of things. And so we've created somewhat of a curriculum here so that people can kind of reach those levels in the organization. Because the other thing is, it's common language. You also want to make sure you have common language that people understand. And I think that common language can happen from a new person joining the company all the way up to the board. So you want a common language, because then when you start speaking in that language, there's not this pause where you got to define terms, right? Now everybody's speaking the same language. And so, the other thing I'd say is data is everywhere now, right? And if you read The Economist or the Wall Street Journal, whatever you do, if you don't understand something, it's like I tell my kid, don't gloss over it. That's a learning moment. So Wendy will tell you, when they put data in front of me, it's probably agonizing, because I go through every specific, I want to be able to speak it almost like they do. I'll never get to that point, because I think it's important for me. It's learning for me. And if you are an incessant learner, you will continue to kind of grow those skill sets. And you can't escape data and analytics today. I don't care what you do. It's everywhere. And so it's your miss if you don't take those opportunities to upskill yourself. You've got to stay current. And I say part of staying current is riding that continuum.
Yeah, and I think for me, the 2 things that I would say, one has already been said earlier in this panel, I know in earlier panels this morning, as just building those relationships and finding allies, finding people that you can connect to, that can be trusted confidants and a sounding board. What's resonating, what's not, what's working, what's not, what challenges do you have? Where can data, where can analytics help solve or spark the right conversations around those things? And having those relationships throughout the HR function and throughout the organization to really get a pulse on things and understand what works, what doesn't work. So I think that's the first piece. And then the second piece, again, is a bit of a summary from the earlier conversation here, is it's the art and the science. It's a little bit of both. My boss, our head of HR, refers to this as being chefs, not bakers. There's not always a strict recipe that we can follow. Sometimes you've got to ad lib a little bit and improvise. And it's a blend of, it can't just be about facts and figures and numbers and thinking that that's going to be the silver bullet solution to everything and give you all the right answers. It's really, again, about sparking conversations, mixing the quantitative and qualitative elements, understanding the gaps that you have in your data, because as big as data can be, there's going to be gaps of things that we don't have access to or we can't measure today or whatever the case, and being aware of them and being creative on how you can account for those things is, again, part of the success for the people analytics function.
I have some new team members, new to the domain, fresh out of college. What I've told them is to focus on progression, not perfection. I think a lot of times, similar to what Wendy said, we can get caught up and want to be at this top of this curve. But what you really need to understand is that it is a progression throughout, and you need to be able to play along that whole spectrum and really understanding where you want to be and all of the individual steps that are needed to get there, and focusing on those components, those pieces, and being able to build upon that. And I think when you start to hone in on that and really focus on it, you can start to celebrate those early wins and those little wins, knowing that you are progressing exactly the way that you think you should. I think the other thing to recognize as well is that there are a lot of different roles in people analytics, right? You don't need to be uber technical or be a statistician or one thing or the other. There are a lot of different ways to contribute in this space. I think as we've been talking through this today, we're really switching hats all the time, right? We go from a business translator to a consultant to a statistician to a data scientist or to a visualization person, and there's multiple ways to contribute. I think it's the ability for us to understand that context and apply it the right way for our customers so it resonates with them. And I think when you bring all of those skills together and you find your niche where you're able to contribute in a way that you feel very valued through it, and being able to build your career through that, I think that's where you're able to really start to progress quicker. So,
Dave, I really like that, because so often when people join our profession, they could look at the accomplished people like you on the screen and say, man, I'm so far from there. So I love that progression, not perfection. Just humor me for a little bit. I do these things with my team called humility moments. And it's like my way of taking some of the air out of the room and bringing myself to a place where I feel like I'm way more vulnerable and able to connect with people. So I'd be curious, and I'm going to go right back to you, Dave. How did you get your start in people analytics?
Yeah, no, I mean, I alluded to this a little earlier and actually met Wendy. I was doing did actuarial consulting for over 10 years. And I just heard her talk one day, and I was just so intrigued about people analytics, being able to apply kind of the mathematical principles that I learned to people. And it was really something, to be honest. I had some basic concepts of using data, being able to create some statistical things from it, but really to be able to apply it that way, it was a real learning curve. I started consulting, had to really learn how to talk about it, how to explain it to people. It took a while, but really thankful for that investment that she and the team made in me.
We sucked you right in, Dave, and we never let you go.
Wendy, how about you?
I guess so. I'm here today, so.
Since your stories are so linked, Wendy, I'm gonna come to you. You clearly inspired somebody to come into our space. How did you get your start?
Yeah, well, so my educational background is in the space. So I'm an industrial organizational psychologist by background. But for me, kind of my story, when I first started out and I was in consulting, and I was like many of you, I was doing the programming in SAS and writing code and doing the statistics. And I went to the leader of the group and I said, look, I'm happy to do this. And I get, right, that everybody has to pay their dues. But this might not be my strengths. I'm kind of good with people. So trust me and put me in front of a customer. And I think that was a little different, right? To Dave's point, everybody has to figure out what their role is. And I think for me, recognizing that my strength is probably the translation of the technical to a non-technical audience and being in front of people. And so for me, that was the bigger shift in my trajectory versus a more technical path, which I can do, but I'm a little more of an extrovert, I guess.
Ernest, I'm gonna come to you. Like, leave us with one tidbit of wisdom. What would you leave the crowd with?
Look, I would say, first of all, Donald, you've done a tremendous job. You've missed your calling. I love your energy and the insightfulness you bring. But to your question specifically, nothing breeds hunger for learning like failure. And I was missing some things. There were things happening all around me in various parts of HR that I just wasn't thoughtful enough or smart enough at the time to realize that if I just pulled the data in and looked at it in a different way, it could help me. And we brought a person like Wendy into my life and a prior life who was just doing things with data on predictive hiring and things like that just intrigued me. And from that moment, I became kind of a closet analytics person. And I just think it's what drove me, quite frankly. It was the thirst for learning and the power if you really do it well. I mean, there's so much power in the right amount of analytics that it was life-changing for me. So that's kind of how it was failure, and it drove me to become better in this particular area.
I appreciate the humility, man. Thank you. Brad, how about you, man? Wrap us up.
Yeah, I think my closing piece of advice would be a bit of a summary of this entire conversation. I think it's a little bit to not be afraid of failure. Put something in front of a customer, put something in front of a partner, see if it works, see if it resonates. Obviously, be strategic about that. Don't go immediately to an executive and roll the dice on something you're maybe fairly uncertain about, but be strategic, build allies, build relationships, start off small. I think, coming in with the mindset of humility, nothing should be beneath you. Like Wendy talked about, that maturity curve, I think is, kind of BS. Go anywhere. It can be descriptive statistics, build that appetite, and all those great things are going to be in your future if you head down that path. So that's how I would summarize all of this.